Hello, beautiful people. My name's Kristin. I appreciate you stopping by my channel. These are going to be my book reviews for the books that I read in the month of February. And I had a really good reading month. I've decided that when I'm kind of stressed out or need a break or a reset, books are just my go-to. And it was a lot of, we're at that point of our life where we're trying to readjust to everything, and books are a fantastic therapy for those of us who like to read. And I'm hoping that if you're watching this, you like to read, and maybe you'll be inspired to seek something out or to have some comments, dialogue with me about any of these books or suggestions of new books. So I will start with my classics. I did read the nonfiction book 84 Charing Cross. This is a lovely short nonfiction classic novel that is actually a set of letters, and it is between a woman who is an avid reader and collector in America writing to a London bookstore, and she just over about 20 some years has this amazing relationship developed between the owner and several of the employees at the bookstore. And it's just a really, really interesting perspective into their lives, into kind of some history that's going on. I don't want to give it away because it's a really short book, so you'll just have to read it yourself to see what goes on with these people. But I loved it. I love this kind of dialogue and nonfiction reality into a peek of somebody else's world, especially when it has to do with books. I also, for February, wanted to read some romance. This is Madame Bovary, and it is a scandalous story of basically a woman who kind of embraces her own womanhood and sexuality in a time that it wasn't really fashionable or presentable. I don't know that it ever totally is, but anyway, it basically is kind of centered around a married woman who has an affair. So also, it wasn't that long of a book either, about 340 pages. And, I totally get the goodness of this being one of those classics that kind of set the precedent of shaking things up and those kind of storylines. So it's a good February read, y'all. I'm not gonna diss it. And then, since I was on a classic roll, I also picked up The Age of Innocence. Oh, bookmark fell out. The Age of Innocence by Edith Warton. And this is another kind of relationship story, also good for February, but it kind of centers around a woman who is separated and wrestling with divorce, when divorce is like the highest scandal, just really, really scandalous. And then kind of moving on from that, there is arranged marriages and this concept of wrestling. It's a very slow read. It took me a very long time to get into it. I had to even decide kind of at the beginning, maybe I'm not totally in the right frame to keep going with, a slow classic, but I really appreciate the philosophical wrestlings, if you will, which I think is probably one of the appeals of making it a long-standing classic. And the writing is very beautiful, particularly at the beginning of each chapter where she's laying out the scenes. I really, really appreciated the language and descriptors and all those kind of good things. So I would recommend it to certain people, particularly if you're okay with a slower character philosophical classic that you're reading, to really get an appreciation of later literary works. But it's definitely not a fast-moving plot and was hard to get into, in my humble opinion. And I have to say, it was ironic that I read that, because that book was mentioned very quickly in Kristin Hannah's The Four Winds. And I have another video that I am doing an exclusive review of this book in depth with my friend Michelle Eskens, and we will have that posted separately. I will link it when it's available in the description. But this is a awesome story. Loved it. The story of the Dust Bowl with a terrible, terrible economic depression and crisis going on in the United States, and wrestling with the lands that are dying, and trying to also deal in the midst of trying to find work and trying to get relief, and dealing with the government and all those kind of prejudice that comes up with all those kind of issues. So just a beautiful written story. Very sad though. So this is not a light-hearted book. It's more historical fiction that is going to be very difficult in this sense emotionally to deal with. But if you're in that place, it's a beautiful ride. Next, I picked up another Brandon Sanderson. This is Warbreaker. This is one of his standalones. So if you're not wanting to commit to hundreds and thousands of pages for a trilogy to complete one of his stories, you just kind of want to see if you are a Brandon Sanderson fan, this is an excellent book. It is not as good as Mistborn. That's going to be probably one of my all-time favorite fiction books, and definitely probably my most favorite fantasy book. But this book is a beautiful story about a people in a magic system that kind of draws on magic of colors and ties to the different traditions and people. And so there's politics going on. There is a war that is impending for resources and pressures, and trying to navigate all those kind of stuff. And there is a god that we're trying to figure out exactly what's up with that, and where the power comes from, and how we can restore the relations without going to war, and those kind of good things. So beautiful standalone fantasy book. Really enjoyed it. Lots of action and fun read. Then I read The Mother-in-Law by Sally Hepworth. This was a kind of a whodunit murder mystery, but what I really love about this book is it's actually the person who ends up deceased. It has a lot of flashbacks of her first perspective, like the story told from her perspective, and it's going back and forth between mostly her and the girl who married into the family. So it is those two women and their relationship and their families, and everybody in the family has an issue, and you're trying to figure out, it's one of those things where everybody's kind of lying and telling half-truths, and you're trying to figure out what the real story is and what's the real point, and all those kind of things. So fun, quick, easy read. For some nonfiction reading, I picked up Robert Gottlieb's Avid Reader. He was an editor, writer for the New Yorker and the Chicago Tribune and several other publishing houses. Had a very long-standing career in publishing magazines, newspapers, and books. And it was a fun read. I really enjoyed mostly the aspects of him talking about trying to work deals to try to kind of keep authors who were really noteworthy happy, or when knowing to let them go or to find another place for them. He published things like Ray Bradbury, and he knew a lot of the authors and books that I had read in the past, and so that was kind of interesting. He even worked really early on with Michael Crichton and kind of thought that he was not really the right fit for his publishing house. but kind of was in the front runner of trying to hash out some of that early Jurassic Park kind of stuff. So just really those interesting kind of stories. If you like books and publishing and that kind of stuff, you can learn a lot from this kind of book, and it's pretty interesting, although in a lot of ways it's kind of dry reading. And really good book all about eggs. Got this at the Dollar Tree. It actually has a bunch of like recipes and stories, but then it also has like history and background of eggs, chickens, the mythology behind it. It was just such a good book. I am keeping this book. I just really learned some stuff. I learned about some types of eggs and birds that I never even knew about, and talked to some about the Fabergé eggs and that history. And I don't know that I'll actually try any of the recipes, but it made me hungry and want to go eat some egg salad. Also, nonfiction. I read a theological book, The End of Youth Ministry, Why Parents Don't Really Care About Youth Groups and What Youth Workers Should Do About It, by Andrew Root. Andrew Root is probably my favorite modern day theologian. I just really appreciate his ability to take pop culture and current events and then talk about old school theology and theologians and bring that together to kind of make sense for a lay person like myself, and basically talking about the culture of when I was a student and we were trying to not have us grow up too fast, be a safe haven of, limiting sex, drugs, and rock and roll and all that kind of stuff. And now kids are sheltered and overscheduled, and it's not about that. And what is it about? And it was a great, fascinating read that made me think and learned a lot, and I like it. So if you have any interest in that was a good one. Then stop if you were scrolling. You want to hear about this one. The one to watch. This is like a comedy romance. It basically is a plus size girl who is also a fashion blogger and very into girliness and fashion and beauty and all those things, and she has, along with her friends, obsession over the Bachelorette reality shows. And so she writes, as a famous blogger, a reaction to how there's not any real girls like her size on these shows. And so she basically gets on one of these shows, and it's kind of a story. And I thought the beginning was kind of slow to it. Maybe I just needed to get in that right kind of more campy mindset. But I have watched these reality shows and really appreciated them, particularly early on. I don't really watch them much now, but I used to back in the 80s and 90s in particular, and you know what? It doesn't change. So this was just really, really fun, and I just found myself laughing a lot and really appreciating her and her voice and some of the thoughts around some of these shows and how they treat different people. So totally recommend that one. I think this would even be a good beach read or light read. Then I read The Life We Bury, Alan Eskens, and this is a story of a college boy who has an English assignment to interview, kind of write a biography of someone else, and he picks a gentleman who basically is dying but had been in prison for a crime, and he has to wrestle with, did he really do it? What is the philosophy and purpose and dealing with all of this past, and how does that tie into him and some of the things that he's experienced in his life? And just really, really interesting. And I seem to keep on, not intentionally, but having a lot of these justice wrestling issues coming up in a lot of the things that I'm reading. So it just makes me kind of ponder and think deeply, even when I'm not reading it, think about some of these bigger issues, like what would happen if something like this really went down? What does that mean? And what are the implications of that? And then the last one I'm going to talk about, share, the last one I read, The Address by Fiona Davis. This was amazing, fantastic. I love this book. This book made me think outside of reading it a lot, what I was just saying. It basically takes place at this one famous kind of resident, swanky apartment complex, I guess it is. It's like one of those buildings where it's kind of like upscale condos, and you kind of have your own servants, if you will, your own kind of community that's kind of gated and upper end, way back in, does it say a year? I don't know, but old school, a couple hundred years ago, more like the beginning of, towards the beginning of the country, and then flips open to more modern day. And of course you have the two different women. They're connected somehow. We're trying to figure out what's the connection, how do they relate to each other, what is the mystery, what actually happened to some of these things in the past, what was the big scandal that was being covered up, and you're just trying to figure it out and wrestle that out. And there is a prison system with people that actually are put away in mental asylums and prisons and things like that, and wrestling with that. And some of that it'll go through and actually tell you the actual history of this is, we took some liberties making this fictitious, but the reality is this really happened, and there really was this person that kind of went in and explored it and busted it up and all that kind of stuff. And it's just really, really interesting. You're trying to figure out the family connections and the mystery of what went down. And I never like to spoil it or whatever, but if that sounds at all interesting, check it out. I always say read 50 to 60 pages. If you're not into it, then let it go. But those are the books that I enjoyed this month. It was a fun reading month. I look forward to reading some more in March, sharing it with you. If you've read any of these, want to leave a comment of what you thought, or if there's any that you are currently reading that you would think that I should take a look at, leave me a comment with that as well. I wish y'all the best. Happy reading.